There is a pain so old, so woven into the very fabric of our being, that we often mistake it for personality. It shapes how we love, how we trust, how we speak to ourselves in silence. It determines whether we shrink or rise, whether we overgive or disconnect, whether we live to please or learn to breathe in our own truth. This pain is called the mother wound, not in judgment of our mothers, but in recognition of the profound psychological impact early maternal relationships have on our identity and emotional life. The journey of healing the mother wound begins, not with accusation, but with awakening. Most of us grow up internalizing the idea that questioning our caregivers is an act of betrayal. We absorb this loyalty so deeply that even thinking about how we were emotionally affected feels like disobedience. But true healing never starts from silence. It begins when we give ourselves permission to tell the truth, not a truth wrapped in blame, but one anchored in clarity. That clarity requires us to look at the mother not as an ideal, not as an untouchable symbol, but as a human being, complex, unfinished, shaped by her own wounds and circumstances. And it also requires us to look at ourselves not just as survivors of a childhood, but as witnesses of a lineage of emotional inheritance. To acknowledge the mother wound is not to diminish the role of the mother. It is to understand that even the most well-intentioned love can leave a residue of pain when it is filtered through unresolved trauma, unmet needs, or emotional absence. A mother can love her child deeply and still harm them unintentionally by withholding affirmation, by projecting her fears, by controlling rather than nurturing, or by being too preoccupied with her own survival to truly see who the child is. And this is where the wound begins, in the space between the child's emotional need and the mother's capacity to meet it. There are children who grow up believing they are too much because their mother could not hold space for their emotions. Others grow up feeling invisible because their needs were always deferred. Some were told they were selfish for having boundaries. Others were idealized until they no longer knew the difference between being loved for who they are and being loved for how well they performed. These wounds don't vanish when we grow older. They shape the way we speak to ourselves in our heads. They define how much love we think we're worthy of. They dictate whether we trust others or perpetually expect abandonment. They become the invisible architects of our adult relationships, and yet, so many carry this pain in silence. Because society has made it sacred to revere the mother, but taboo to examine the harm that might have occurred. We're told to be grateful, to remember the sacrifices she made. And while gratitude may be true, it should not be used as a weapon to suppress our story. You can be grateful and still hurt. You can forgive and still need to heal. Love does not invalidate pain. In fact, love is the very reason we must face the pain. Because we cannot fully love ourselves while rejecting the parts of us shaped by that pain. In many ways, the mother becomes the first mirror in which we try to see ourselves. If that mirror was cracked or clouded or distorted, we learn to question our reflection. We wondered, am I lovable? Am I too much? Am I good enough? And if our answers were shaped by emotional inconsistency or emotional neglect, those questions calcify into lifelong patterns of self-doubt. We stop trusting our instincts. We look outside ourselves for validation. We silence our own needs to maintain harmony in relationships. These are not random flaws. They are adaptations. Intelligent, necessary adaptations made by a child who wanted, more than anything, to belong. This is why the first step in healing is not confrontation, it is recognition. To name what was missing, what was painful, what was silently endured. And to do so with compassion, not just for the mother, but for the child you once were. That child who learned to suppress their truth in order to be close to someone they depended on. That child who carried guilt for being angry, shame for being hurt, and fear for speaking their truth. That child still lives within you. And until they are acknowledged, they will keep influencing how you navigate the world. There was a woman who came to this realization during a conversation about her tendency to overextend herself in every relationship. She was always the one to call, to fix, to apologize first. And underneath that pattern, she found a memory of being told, as a little girl, that love had to be earned, that she had to be the good one, the mature one, the helper. Her mother, overwhelmed and emotionally fragile, depended on her daughter to be the emotional adult. And so, she learned that her worth came from taking care of others, not from simply existing. That pattern followed her into adulthood like a shadow. When she finally said aloud, "I was never allowed to be a child," her whole body shook with relief. Not because she was blaming her mother, but because she was finally witnessing her own truth. To acknowledge the wound is to remove the mask. The one we wear to convince others we're fine, even when we're not. It is to stop justifying the neglect by saying, "She did her best," and instead to say, "Her best still left me with unmet needs." This is not ungrateful. This is honest. And only from honesty can transformation begin. It is not about holding grudges or rewriting history to vilify someone we love. It is about reclaiming our emotional landscape and saying, "This too shaped me." It is about recognizing that healing begins not when we change the past, but when we stop denying its impact. And the beauty of this process is that once you acknowledge the wound, you create space for a new story, one in which you are no longer just the daughter or son of your mother, but the parent of your own soul. The work is difficult, yes. But in telling the truth about our past, we liberate the future. Not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. Because every wound we name and tend to becomes one less pattern we pass on in silence. That is the quiet revolution. That is where the cycle ends. And that is where real love, fierce, awake, and free, begins to grow, once the mother wound is acknowledged, not as a condemnation of the mother, but as a sacred truth of the self. The second step begins, the long but liberating journey of remothering. This step isn't simply about healing a memory. It's about stepping into the role your own soul has been waiting for, the role of nurturer, protector, and emotional guide for the inner child still trapped in time. That child, no matter how long ago they were silenced, still waits to be seen, held, and understood. And there is no external figure, no partner, no parent, no therapist who can truly offer what only your inner adult can give now. Presence. To remother is to become your own safe space. It is not something abstract or philosophical. It is a living, breathing commitment that unfolds in your smallest choices. It's in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. It's in whether you allow yourself to rest without guilt. It's in how you respond to your fear, your sadness, your need for love. Many of us, shaped by early emotional deprivation, grew into adulthood wearing invisible armor, always prepared to protect, perform, or please, but never really allowed to rest into the softness of being fully ourselves. Remothering begins where that armor is no longer necessary. The child within you does not need perfection. They need consistency. They need someone who stays. When shame arises, they don't need to be told to get over it. They need to hear, "I'm here with you. You're not wrong for feeling this." When fear rises, they don't need to be told to toughen up. They need the calm voice of a loving inner mother saying, "You are safe now. I've got you." Over time, this inner relationship becomes a sanctuary, a place where your raw, unfiltered self is no longer punished or rejected, but gently guided. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Imagine a person who constantly overcommits, saying yes to things they have no energy for. They feel resentful, exhausted, invisible, but they don't know how to stop. Beneath that behavior is often an old pattern, a belief that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. Perhaps, as a child, they were only noticed when they were helpful. Perhaps they learned that saying no triggered guilt or even withdrawal of affection. So now, as an adult, their nervous system still registers no as danger. But when they begin to remother themselves, something shifts. That old fear is still there, but a new voice emerges, a voice that says, "It's okay to disappoint someone to honor yourself. I will not abandon you for choosing your truth." This is the essence of remothering, giving yourself permission. Permission to feel, permission to rest, permission to express anger, permission to set boundaries, permission to be complex, contradictory, evolving. All the permissions you once needed from someone else, you now begin to give to yourself. It's not easy. The old conditioning will push back. The shame will whisper that you're selfish, the guilt will rise. But that's the moment to respond differently. That's when you turn inward and say, I see you. I know why you're afraid. But I'm here now. You're no longer alone in this. For many, this work brings up intense grief, not just for what happened, but for what never did. The bedtime story never read. The arms that never held you while you cried. The words you needed to hear but never did. Grieving unmet needs is perhaps one of the most sacred and overlooked aspects of healing. It is not indulgent. It is not weak. It is an act of radical self-honesty and self-love. Because only by mourning what was missing can you stop unconsciously, seeking it in others, often in ways that lead to more disappointment. And this mourning doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as rage. Rage at the silence, at the emotional exile, at the unspoken expectations you were forced to carry. This rage is not wrong. It's a compass. It tells you where you were hurt. It tells you what matters. But instead of lashing out or turning it inward, you now create a space to hold it. You say, tell me everything. And when that younger part of you finally speaks, not in words but in raw emotion, you don't shut it down. You listen, you honor. And slowly, it begins to soften. Through this process, your identity shifts. You stop being the child waiting for someone else to give you what you never had. You become the adult who creates it, moment by moment. And that power is unshakable because it doesn't depend on external validation. It comes from your own soul's commitment to never abandon itself again. This does not mean you never need anyone. We are relational beings. We still long for love, for community, for intimacy. But now you relate from wholeness, not hunger. You no longer enter relationships trying to fix your past through your partner's behavior. You no longer seek parental energy from your friends or your lovers. Instead, you come as someone who has made peace with your own roots, even the ones that grew in rocky soil. You come as someone who has walked through the fire of your own story and emerged not burned. But baptized. Mothering is not a final destination. It's a lifelong practice. Some days it will be easy. Other days you will slip back into old patterns. But each time you return to yourself, you strengthen the bond. And over time, the emotional muscles grow stronger. You begin to trust yourself not because you're always right, but because you've proven you will stay. This is the kind of inner work that transforms generations. Because once you stop passing down what was passed to you in silence, you become the threshold, the one who says, it ends with me. You become the mother you never had, not just for yourself, but for every part of your lineage that was aching for someone to say, you are enough, just as you are. You may never hear those words from the person who birthed you, but that does not mean you are doomed to live without them. Because the miracle of healing is this: you can become the one you've been waiting for. Healing the mother wound is not about rewriting the past, it is about reclaiming the self that was buried beneath it. It is about choosing, day by day, to stop living from the scripts we inherited and start living from the truth we uncover. It is a homecoming to the parts of ourselves we had to exile just to be accepted, to survive. And that homecoming may be quiet. It may be invisible to others. But it is the most courageous journey we will ever take. There is no perfect mother, just as there is no perfect child. But what we can become through awareness, compassion, and presence is whole. Wholeness does not mean we erase our pain. It means we no longer let it define us. It means we hold our grief in one hand and our rebirth in the other. It means we speak the truth not to wound, but to wake. When we stop waiting for the apology that never came. When we stop searching for the mother who never arrived. When we decide to become the guardian of our own soul, something miraculous happens. The pain begins to loosen its grip. The patterns begin to dissolve. And a new self begins to rise, not out of blame, but out of brave, sacred self-responsibility. That is the invitation. Not to fix the past, but to no longer be ruled by it. Not to make your mother wrong, but to make yourself free. Because the moment you begin to show up for the child within you, the cycle breaks. And where the wound once lived, love begins to grow steady, fierce, and unshakable. You are not broken. You are becoming. And that is more than enough.